Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Missing Frames. This is the podcast where we watch all the movies we should have seen by this point in our lives. I'm your host, Shawn Eastridge. We're hanging out on the Nerd Party Network, a collection of podcasts dedicated to all things entertainment. Check us out at thenerdparty.com and make sure you're following us at Join Nerd Party on Twitter and at the Nerd Party on Facebook and Instagram. We are at another milestone episode, the big 130. And for every milestone episode, you need a milestone guest host. So back in the hot chair once again, we have Brad Gullickson. Welcome back, Brad.
Hello, happy to be here. As somebody who considers himself straight but not narrow, I am looking forward to talking about the straight story.
I thought you would be. So for those who aren't aware of our history, Brad and mine's history on this show, kind of accidentally, we started doing these anniversary landmark episodes. We started with the 30th episode of Missing Frames, and then we just kind of kept it up with number 40, number 50, number 60, all the way up to 100, and now 130. And the last time, episode 120, we watched One Buckaroo Banzai and the Eighth Dimension. Did I get that right?
No. The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai across the Eighth Dimension.
There's a very important distinction there. This is why I have you on the show, Brad. But it was a delightful romp, and we had a wonderful time. Lisa came on.
Yeah.
That was really great. Your wonderful wife, Lisa. So it's my turn now. I've got to pick the movie. As you said, straight story. A film that you have not seen before, Brad.
That is true. It is one of two David Lynch movies I have never seen.
And the other one is
Inland Empire. It scares me.
I can't blame you. I saw it for the first time last year in a movie theater, and it is a film that scared me. So that's understandable. We were planning the episode. We were trying to pick a film, and we had a couple of options from filmmakers. I won't say who. I don't want to spoil future potential episodes, but there were filmmakers we'd covered before, but you and I have never discussed David Lynch before, have we?
No. I'm excited to do so. I'm a huge David Lynch fan, despite having never seen The Straight Story or Inland Empire. But I assure you that I love all of his movies, including the ones that a lot of people tend not to like.
When did you discover this love of David Lynch?
That's an interesting question. That's not the question I was anticipating, because there's a difference between when did you discover David Lynch and when did you discover your love for David Lynch.
Tell me both, or whatever one speaks to you. That's going to give the most zest to this episode.
Well, I was an X-Files kid, and I think I first really heard the name of David Lynch because of Twin Peaks, the television show. And as an X-Files kid, I thought I would really like Twin Peaks, but then I tried out Twin Peaks and it really disturbed me. So I stayed away for a long time.
It's a different vibe too. Like, I had kind of a similar experience where I was a big X-Files
very different vibe
fan.
than X-Files.
Very, very. And you can see, I mean, like, in terms of, because Twin Peaks was so revolutionary and so influential that it was like, oh yeah, it gave birth to the X-Files, which, yeah, absolutely. But if you go into Twin Peaks expecting something that's, I guess, the X-Files unique brand of horror.
Where's my
mystery.
fluke man, David Lynch? Where's my fluke
Exactly.
man?
We're not getting like Monster of the Week. We're not getting alien conspiracies, and we're not getting that glorious chemistry between Gillian Anderson and David Duchovny. What we're getting is this weird, quirky ensemble, kind of slow pace. Like, X-Files was very like hit you over the head with the scares and the production design, and Twin Peaks is a little bit like, it kind of gets under your skin and like, think about it a little more. That's what I felt like.
Not going to understand Twin Peaks, okay? Like, a 20-year-old
Yes, maybe that's how you put it.
Relationship with sexuality and the thematic material that Twin Peaks is delving into is totally foreign to them. And if they have a hint of it at all, it's probably repellent. And it's so, I feel like Twin Peaks is like the perfect teenager show. So when I finally did get around to watching the series as a teenager, it clicked more with me. But again, that's not really where I discovered my love of David Lynch either. It really wasn't until it's probably Mulholland Drive. Like I had seen Dune at some point in my high school years. I'd seen Blue Velvet, right? And I liked all of them to varying degrees, but it wasn't really until I saw Mulholland Drive on the big screen in downtown DC at a very sketchy movie theater, the perfect kind of movie theater to watch something like Mulholland Drive.
I was going to say, that seems about right.
And I stumbled out of that theater in a daze. And then I went back and I watched the David Lynch stuff. And that's where I started to go like, this dude's my jam.
This is similar to my story where I got into Twin Peaks kind of the same way. The same friend, Matthew Schott, who has been on, he is on episode 129, Dark Man. He's the one who introduced me to the X-Files, and I knew about the X-Files growing up, and he was the one who opened the door for me. He was the one who had the series on DVD. This is pre-Netflix days where you needed it on DVD or you caught reruns on television, and he would let me borrow one season at a time, and I would trade him for the next season.
Those things were so expensive.
They really were. And then Twin Peaks, he kind of went through a Twin Peaks David Lynch phase right around the time where I was getting into X-Files. And so he was introducing me to the films of David Lynch, and I was not prepared. The first one he showed me was Eraserhead, and I was not remotely ready for that. And then I think I saw Mulholland Drive, and I enjoyed that. I think I watched Blue Velvet on my own, and I enjoyed that one too. But it wasn't until I started watching Twin Peaks. He actually did not introduce, he told me about Twin Peaks. I knew he loved it, but he was not letting me, I was too in the thick of it with X-Files, so I never got around to borrowing Twin Peaks from him. But when I eventually watched Twin Peaks, I remember just kind of being a bit baffled and slowly but surely getting into it. And then kind of like what you said, where you watched Mulholland Drive and that made you want to go back and get into all the works. I watched Eraserhead again. I made my wife, Sarah, watch it. I basically subjected her to the same situation I'd been in, where Matt came to visit me at school and said, we're watching this, don't ask questions. I basically did that to Sarah. I said, we're watching this, don't ask questions. And that time I loved it. And that really kicked off my love of David Lynch and my appreciation of him. And eventually I went back and rewatched Blue Velvet, rewatched Mulholland Drive, went and watched everything, and then was kind of going down a list, checking things off. And The Straight Story was the one that was, out of everything he did, even Dune, I remember looking at The Straight Story in his filmography and thinking, I haven't really heard of that one. People don't really talk about that one as much when it comes to David Lynch. And I looked it up and I was like, oh, it's a Disney movie. It's a G-rated Disney movie directed by David Lynch. I'm sorry, what? And, it's sandwiched between Lost Highway and Mulholland Drive. And I was just kind of like, well, where can I watch this? It wasn't anywhere at the time. Disney Plus wasn't around. And the only way I could get it was I had to order the DVD off of Amazon. There's still no Blu-ray of this. And I'm hoping that this episode, Brad, I'm putting the good vibes out into the internet. I'm hoping that this will inspire the Criterion collection, which is already, they've got some relationship going on with Disney. You got WALL-E out on 4K now. Let's get this happening for The Straight Story because I need it. I watched this film, Brad, and I won't tell you about it because I don't want to spoil anything, but if the words G-rated Disney movie and David Lynch don't make sense now, they will when you're done with the movie. If that without spoiling anything, it feels like a David Lynch movie, and yet it is so apart from anything else he's done.
Yeah, I remember when the movie came out and it was received extremely well. And it showed up on all these critics' top 10 lists. And I remember having the same thought that you did, like, huh, that's weird, strange. I'll get to it eventually. And then for whatever reason, I never did. But I wonder if it is just the fact that it's a G rated Lynch film and it's just such a bizarre idea to me that I never put forth any energy to really figure that out because it's just such an alien concept.
On many, many levels, I think it's who do you market the film for? Because I think David Lynch fans are
Film critics,
expecting
film Twitter.
Yeah. I mean, I think you have Lost Highway, and David Lynch, I think at this point in his career, some would argue, you have Fire Walk with Me, which was not well received. You have Wild at Heart, which I think one can, but was also not well received. And I think to this day, I think, Brad, you are a fan of Wild at Heart, right?
I love Wild at Heart.
Okay. I'm not
I'm going to tell you right now, like every Lynch movie I have seen, I love.
Okay, great. Great.
Dune, Lost Highway, Wild at Heart, love.
I need to watch Wild at Heart again. I'll just put that, I'll say that and nothing more. But then Lost Highway 2, I think, and I saw here's the thing. I saw Lost Highway once, didn't like it. Then I rewatched it at the Plaza Theater in Atlanta when they screened it there, and I thought it was great. So I'll just say maybe I need to rewatch Wild at Heart. I don't know that I need to rewatch Dune. There is a Missing Frames episode for that. You can go listen to it if you want. But I can see how this would baffle people, how it's something that you can't quite market it to the audience that's expecting the follow-up to Lost Highway. But I do remember the critical kind of mudslide that he was going down. All of a sudden he went back up in terms of standing with critics who were also, I think, pleasantly baffled by this film.
Yeah, totally.
It's a film, again, we'll talk more about it. I won't say too much, but what I will say is I think this is his, the works of David Lynch have so much to give, so I don't want to downplay my love of him and of his other movies. Anyone who's listened to the show knows I love David Lynch with a passion and that he's one of my favorite filmmakers. But I think The Straight Story is his most generous film. Like, I think it is both unmistakably him and also completely off the beaten path for him in ways that are really, really beautiful. And I'm going to trail off, and I'm worried I'm going to start saying things about it. So, Brad, I'm going to stop myself here, and I'm going to ask you to tell me what you think The Straight Story is about.
Well, I know it's about Richard Farnsworth getting on a lawnmower and going across the country because I think his brother's sick. Mm-hmm. Is that right? I think
that's right. I'll give you that.
That's what I remember of it. I know that Sissy Spacek is in the movie. I believe Harry Dean Stanton's in the film.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But that's that we've hit the limit. That's my knowledge. And we've said it. It's a Disney G-rated movie.
This is all you need to know going into it. I'm very, very excited to see what you think about it. And I think this will make for a great discussion. You think you're going to enjoy it?
Yeah, I'm pretty positive that not only will I enjoy it, but I'll love it. And I think I'll just reiterate what I've already kind of said here, that I'm slightly disappointed in myself that I haven't seen it already. Like past movies you've shown me, I've been like, well, it just wasn't my thing. Like we did My Neighbor Totoro, and I think I said on that intro that Miyazaki was just never my thing.
Right.
And then that movie won me over to Miyazaki, and I went and I rewatched and revisited and explored new Miyazaki films and kind of fell in love with him. But this, like, I'm already kind of like in the bag for Lynch.
Yeah.
So I think I'm good. I think we're gonna have a good time.
I think what's going to be important about this and talking about it is it's not like there is a lack of straight story fans out there. And I think a lot of David Lynch fans do appreciate this film, but I feel like this movie has never quite gotten the attention it deserves. And it deserves attention.
Well,
I'll
how
just
many
say
references to the Wizard of Oz are going to be in it? That's what I
that.
need to know.
You know, I think just a man traveling on an adventure on a specific road. I guess it's not yellow bricked. Maybe there is a yellow brick road that I missed, but we could at least put, maybe there's a rainbow in the film. It's been a while since I've seen the movie. I've watched the straight story once. It was I want to say it was 2017, 2018. So we're talking about maybe 5 to 6 years now since I last watched it.
But maybe that's
And
also why people don't really talk about it, because it doesn't lean heavily into all the David Lynch tropes, or maybe it does, but that's my impression. Is it doesn't feel like, it feels Lynch, but it doesn't have all the hallmarks of a Lynch film.
I
Right?
think,
Wrong?
yeah, well, I think what it is, you know, you are expecting nightmarish, unforgettable things. A Lynch movie conjures up feelings that you're like, oh, I didn't know how to put it to words. I still can't put it to words, but he somehow put it to celluloid. He somehow manifested it and made it a thing that I can now react to. And I think people are so used to, like, yeah, Lynch, he makes some gnarly movies, that when you have something like this where it's coming from a different place. But I think I think for Lynch, there is no difference in terms of, like, he didn't make this movie because he's like, oh, I guess I should make this Disney movie that appeals to more people. I think he felt just as passionately about this as he did about anything he makes. And I think this is a film that is revealing a part of him that I think you can get from the interviews. If you watch a David Lynch interview, you're just like, how does this guy make that? How does this guy make Eraserhead? I think the journey from how did this guy make Straight Story is a little shorter and a little less baffling. It feels like a movie he would make just based on the amount of joy watching him talk brings me. It I'm very excited for you to watch it, and I'm very excited to rewatch it, because since the day I first watched it, I have not been able to stop thinking about it, and I've been wanting an excuse to watch it again, and this
Yeah,
is perfect.
I'm very excited. I feel like, Lynch is a Midwesterner, right? He's from Montana. And this
Mhm.
is like his Montana movie. Like,
Right.
all his friends back in Montana could totally click with the Straight Story in a way that they can't click with Lost Highway.
Exactly. I think that's spot on. So I think we're ready. What do you think?
Yeah, let's do it.
Now available to own on video cassette.
And we're back. Brad, give it to me straight. How do you feel about the Straight Story?
I really liked it. I would say that I maybe even loved it.
Oh my God, that makes me so happy.
When I was ranking it, not ranking it, when I was rating it on Letterboxd, my initial reaction was to go 3.5. Oh, like, I'm spoiling the end of this podcast, but my initial reaction was to go like 3.5 stars. And then as I was putting 3.5 in there, I was like, well, why not 4?
Why not 4?
And frankly, why not 5? Like,
that's my thought.
What's wrong with this movie? I really can't find anything in it where I would be like, nope, not going to give that 5 stars. I didn't give it 5 stars because I find like I have a barrier in my brain that prohibits me from giving any movie on a first watch.
Yeah, you've
stars.
mentioned this.
And I should get over myself.
You and I,
the Straight Story will help me do that.
That's going to be my goal for this episode. Is I think you and I have pushed each other. I think you pushed me with My Neighbor Totoro, which I think I was going to rate lower, and you helped me come to terms with, like, you're like, no, you love My Neighbor Totoro. It deserves 5 stars, and you know it, and you're right. And to this day, I still think that's a 5-star movie.
And so, like, you then have to investigate, well, why, Brad, was your initial reaction 3.5? And I think I was just sort of immediately trying to put it in my rankings of David Lynch films, and I don't think The Straight Story will ever surpass Mulholland Drive, Blue
Sure.
Velvet, even Wild at Heart. But that being said, like just looking at it as a film that stands alone, I think it's got to be 4-star movie.
I will here's the thing, and here's why I don't think you need to be defensive is my initial rating of this was 4 stars before this episode. This is not seen in Missing Frames history. We're spoiling the star ratings before the end of the episode.
I feel bad about it, Shawn.
I don't feel bad about it at all.
Okay,
You
good.
know what? David Lynch kind of went off his normal track for this movie, and we're going to go a little off the track for this episode.
But did he though, Shawn?
Did he? Well, that's something else we'll talk about. But I will be honest. I think my initial reaction was like, yeah, this is a solid 4-star movie. And I watched it, I want to say 2017, 2018. So it's been a good 5 years since I last saw it. And since that initial viewing, I'd only seen it once, and it was that viewing 5 years ago. It's just stuck in my brain, and the internal monologue I've had is exactly what you're describing to me right now, which is just thinking about the film. It really, in the way that David Lynch is known for the nightmarish imagery that gets under your skin and sneaks into your dreams, this film also, it sneaks into your heart. It's not trying to creep you out. It's not trying to unsettle you, and it's not unforgettable in the disturbing manner that David Lynch typically does.
But there is a lot of haunting qualities to this film.
Absolutely. And I think it's a film that, as I thought about more and more and thought about those scenes that you are referencing, those haunting, heartbreaking moments, the more and more I thought about it, the more and more I talked about it to other people, including you when we were talking about doing this episode, the more I realized I love The Straight Story more than I thought I did. And it's not even a movie I didn't think I loved, but I realized as I watched it the second time, it kind of reaffirmed my suspicions that first viewing, that first rating was maybe a little bit more lukewarm than it should have been. And this kind of affirmed that for me. But I gave it a 4-star rating first time I saw it, and I understand that kind of like, let's be gentle, let's think about it, let's dwell on it a bit. But as somebody who's done that for a few years, I'm very, very happy I had an excuse to watch it again.
And I'm thankful that I finally got to this film, and really almost immediately was taken with it. The film starts off with the shots of the community, and you have the score from Angelo Badalamenti playing, and you just feel like you're in Twin Peaks.
Yeah.
like this film, based on everything you know already of David Lynch, if you had never seen a trailer of The Straight Story, but you had seen Twin Peaks, you had seen Blue Velvet.
Yeah, as I say, shades of Blue Velvet in this opening scene.
And like, you could just imagine, like, at any moment, someone's going to uncover a rotting ear in the grass.
Right.
And it's weird that it doesn't, but like, at the same time, as we push in on Alvin's home, and we don't see him initially, we hear him first, him falling in the kitchen, that like sound effect of him plummeting, like I wish I could mimic it, but I'm not Michael Winslow. That like clunk, and you're looking at the frame of his kitchen window, and it's just total darkness in there. There's a lot of dread.
Yes.
At that moment.
At that point, you are feeling like, oh yeah, this is David Lynch. Like, this is a David Lynch film. And it's from that point on that he kind of pulls a fast one on the audience, where then it kind of becomes a sort of comedy of errors. First and foremost, the friend of Alvin's is at the bar wondering, oh, where's Alvin? And he walks home, and you have the lady outside sunbathing who's like, I didn't ask where his wife or where his daughter was. I asked where he was. And just this like comical back and forth.
Yeah,
Alvin's
there's like
just
a little bit of like, I don't like fat shaming going on there, because the neighbor is this overweight woman. She is sunbathing in her yard while eating like donuts or pink ho-hos or something like that, snowballs. And I'm
Living
like,
the
I don't,
dream, basically.
yeah, like I wasn't sure like how I felt about that depiction, but at the same time, like David Lynch is one of those filmmakers, kind of like Daniel Clowes is as a cartoonist, where he just really loves odd people and the odd shapes of people,
Yeah.
and so again, that felt very Lynchian. But the comedy of it, I like initially I was like, I don't know, but I let go of that pretty quickly.
Yeah, the line she says is, "What's the number for 911?" Which is a line that feels, I don't know, like, I don't know the history of that line, but that felt like such a childish line that
It's
you can.
almost like an urban legend joke. Like I
Yeah.
feel like I've heard that story or that gag in a couple places.
So you're kind of like, you're like, wait a second, what is going on? And it feels like David Lynch, because you have this lady who's kind of like very frantic, which is a very Lynch thing, where you have characters who are frantically upset about something and really overreacting. But there's a sweetness as Alvin is just kind of laying on the floor, like, it's no big deal, put down the phone, and just kind of the humor of it. And you're kind of, Lynch is kind of settling you into this new kind of vein that he's testing out, this new kind of like, nothing crazy happened. That foreboding thump that you heard was, he's okay. Alvin's old, but he's okay. Well, maybe not okay, but he's okay, as in he's alive.
He's not
Nothing
dead.
horrible
Yeah.
happened to him. Yes, he's not the decomposing ear in the field. He just took a spill and he fell on the floor,
And
and
Sissy
he's
Spacek
okay.
comes in as Rose, and she's immediately like startled and in terror mode. And
Yes,
Alvin just does not want to go to the doctor.
right.
He's the type of individual like myself who would rather do anything, including just sitting there and dying, than go see a doctor and talk about what ails them.
Exactly. It's a film that is looking into the idea of what happens to you when your body has outlived its usefulness. Does that dull the spirit within? Does that dull who you are? Does that define who you are? And it's a film that is uh, enthusiastically saying absolutely not. I just rewatched No Country for Old Men recently for the first time in a long time. I showed it to my wife, and I love that movie so much. It's probably my favorite Coen Brothers movie. I think it's a perfect film. I think The Straight Story is like the anti No Country for Old Men, not in quality, but in what it's saying about humanity, what it's saying about, like, if No Country for Old Men is kind of the cynical, like, evil will triumph over good and all good can do is get out of the way. And if you're an old man, you kind of have to just, like, it's the turn of the tide, and you have to deal with your place in this world is no longer certain. And The Straight Story is saying the exact opposite. It's saying good can triumph over evil. You can work with what you're given and work above it and do something great. Clearly your phone or your computer
Yeah,
agrees with me.
my computer wants to say I want to update Sean's point of view here, because there's just something in what you're saying that I don't necessarily disagree with, but I think the strongest element of The Straight Story is about facing your mortality,
Yeah.
accepting your mortality, and knowing that your mortality is is there. Your death is there. Wanting to make sure that you let go of the regrets and the anger that you've held on for so long. And the reason, at least how I interpret it, the reason Alvin drives 300 miles on his lawnmower to go see his brother is because he knows he's on his way out. His brother's on his way out, and he wants to clear the air before that happens.
Yeah.
And, he states very matter of factly towards the end of the movie, whatever brought us to this catastrophic apocalyptic fight where our relationship was severed honestly doesn't matter. What matters is that we're brothers, we love each other, and we should remain connected.
I think we're saying the same thing. I just think you wanted to make a show of saying you didn't completely agree with me.
Yes, correct, always.
But that really is, I think your take is spot on. It is a film about achieving great things in on a scale of what appears to be minuscule almost. Like it's simple. It is a straight story and it's nothing overblown. The film is gorgeous, shot by Freddie Francis, who, I didn't realize had worked with Lynch on Dune and
And the
Dune
Elephant Man.
and Elephant Man, and Lynch felt that he specifically needed Freddie back on this film because at this point I think Freddie Francis was in his 80s and he just felt that he needed that man at that age behind the camera, so that you have Richard on one end of the lens and you have Freddie on the other end, and there's an understanding between them and
There's
a
a
comfort.
wisdom to the frame, to the image, to the visual language, just as there's a wisdom to the performance that Richard Farnsworth is bringing to Alvin Straight. But like the other aspect I wanted to talk to before we just moved on a little bit from the regret angle is this idea that he needed to do this journey on this lawnmower. He couldn't accept a ride. There are several opportunities over the course of this movie where he could have gotten to his brother's house faster, but he wanted to get there on his own. And I think the reason he wanted to get there on his own is because he needed the time to work out all the things that have been bothering him over the years, like that anger, to remove it, to embrace forgiveness. That is work. You know, that takes time, that takes serious consideration. And we see him at other points in the movie looking at other moments of regret and having to like expel it, to exercise it out of himself before he even gets to his brother. So I think Alvin is really like not struggling, but he's really practicing removing the anger out of his person.
I agree with you. I think for him it is a necessary journey. It has to be taken solo on his own the way he's doing it. It's the only means he has to do it. He doesn't have a driver's license. He can't see well. He doesn't have any other means to get there. And for him, it's not about getting there quickly. It's about the journey itself. For him, it's like penance almost. Like the journey is part of that. It is what you're suggesting. He needs to purge himself of these feelings. And for him, the journey proves to his brother what he means to him. And not only that, but what he was willing to do and sacrifice in order to be with him. And it means so much more than if he just shows up like, hey, I heard you weren't feeling well. There is a spiritual journey happening here. And you need every hour of the 6 weeks it took him to get from Iowa to what was it, Minnesota? Is
Wisconsin?
That where he was? Wisconsin,
yeah.
Wisconsin,
party people,
real party state. Yeah,
those
but
cheese cheddar heads.
Yes, absolutely. And I just love the film itself. And you think about the opening shot of Lost Highway, which is just speeding frantically down the road in the middle of the night with David Bowie blaring from
almost like a lawnmower has lost its brakes and is speeding down a hill.
Speeding down the hill.
Like that
out of
sequence
control.
in The Straight Story when the camera is just like overhead on the hood of the lawnmower and it's like uncharacteristically fast.
Yes.
It is nightmarish.
It's stressful. It's stressful in the way that David Lynch is so good at. But for the most part, it's like the antithesis of Lost Highway's opening scene. And what's brilliant about the opening and the way we kind of settle into these characters who kind of have these quirks, but like you say, Lynch isn't mocking these people. He has a deep respect and love for them. And he's kind of like, with the way Sissy Spacek plays Rose, where you can almost see a Hollywood version of the affectation, the way she talks. And she plays it really, again, I hate to use the word, but she plays it straight. Like she has difficulty getting her words out, but it's not in a showy way, in a Hollywood way. It's just very, very lovely and simple. And we kind of just settle into this mode of these people and who they are and how they think. And it's nothing complicated. And then when we are starting off on this journey and he's talking to these guys at the shop and he wants a grabber because he needs it for grabbing, it's you're kind of on board with him at that point, because we've kind of Lynch has done a really great job of sort of easing us in and saying, like, don't worry, I'm not gonna spring something fast on you. Like, this is the story we're telling.
It's funny because when the movie is starting, and once, or at least when his journey is starting, I'm trying to figure out, like, okay, well, what's this movie's deal?
Yeah.
And that sequence with the grabber is funny and it's very human, and I enjoyed it. And he gets a certain distance out of town, and you're like, okay, we're on the journey. Here we go. Frodo and Sam, they're out of the Shire. Let's do this. And then, like, you go, like, I don't know, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and his mower conks out and he's
Yeah.
driven all the way back to town. And you realize he's only gone like half a day, but it
Right.
feels like he's already been gone days. And you're just like, oh my God, we're gonna have to start back up again.
And I love that he has to have the ceremony of murdering,
Yes.
sacrificing his previous lawnmower with
I
a
think
shotgun.
murdering is good. He was
Murdering.
mad. He was disappointed
He's
that
not
that first
happy.
mower didn't get him to his brother's house. So that's why that
Yes.
mower got shotgunned.
Yeah, and that mower deserved it. You had to go through the the ceremonial. I just love the way that Rose and
Yeah.
the woman with her are kind of like, oh, what are I can't remember who's with her, but they're
No,
just
it's
kinda
the
like, "What?"
woman. It's the woman with the snowballs.
Right.
And what's great is because she asks Rose a question, and I can't remember what the exact question was. But before Rose can answer, Richard Farnsworth's Alvin cuts through the conversation, cuts through the kitchen, carrying this shotgun.
You're right.
And it's like, okay, what is happening? And then the moment he leaves the kitchen, she just bluntly finally answers that lady's question. And when she answered that question, she was like, what kind of truck was it? And she goes, she waits, he walks through the kitchen, God knows what he's going to do, he leaves the kitchen, and she goes, a Ford. And that was the best laugh in the whole movie for me.
It's so good, but it also speaks to Lynch's brilliance as a filmmaker and his direction. It's very, very, I don't want to say understated, because there is some Lynchian flair, like you described, the runaway lawnmower scene.
Well,
Or
also, like, the way he lingers on things, right? Like
yeah,
that grabber scene, it is a very comical sequence, but there's a moment when Alvin finally gets the grabber and he lays it down on the counter, and the camera just looks at the grabber, and we're there
yeah.
to, like, consider what is this grabber? What is it going to mean for Alvin? What did it mean for this clerk? And that's like a shot you're just not going to get in another filmmaker's movie. Like,
Yes,
there's no other filmmaker that would have shot the straight story the way that David Lynch shoots it.
Yeah, absolutely. And he takes it to extremes in later works, especially I think Twin Peaks: The Return. He really I think shooting digital, he takes it about as far as he can go.
Yeah, we
and
can stare at some corners.
Yes, and does the grabber, what I love about all that is I don't think he use the grabber at all in the movie for anything.
You know what? I hadn't thought about it. Certainly there's no sequence that's immediately jumping to my head with the
Like, I can't even think
grabber.
of, like, does he even use it in a subtle way where he's picking up something with it? And I'm like, that almost made it even better, is the realization that we spend so much time on this grabber, and then it doesn't show up again.
Because early on, the hat goes off his head when a semi drives by, and he's so stubborn he can't accept walking with a walker, so instead he uses two canes.
Right.
So using these two canes to walk back down the highway to pick up that hat, boy, it sure would be great if he had the grabber at that moment, but he has to awkwardly bend down using these two canes to get the hat. And so because he has these two canes, the grabber is almost a moot point.
Right. He just wanted the grabber because he liked it. He needed it for grabbing.
Well, he knows he needs it. Like, he knows that his body is failing him, but at every turn, he tries to do it the way he used to do it when he was a young man. As he tells one of those cyclists, what's the worst thing about being old? The memory of being young, which is just brutal. And I'm not in my 70s yet. I'm in my 40s. And already I'm feeling the truth of that line.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a film that is fixated on the passage of time, growing old, feeling, I guess, not useful. There's we learn more about Rose as the film plays out, and that she was a mother, and that something happened. There was an accident with one. She had 4 children who were taken from her by the state because there was a fire that she had nothing to do with, but because of her mental conditions, there was an assumption that she wasn't capable of taking care of children. And then suddenly these quiet moments, these scenes where we were kind of with her watching the sprinkler and the lawn, watching this
While
little
we're
kid play with the
listening
ball.
to Richard Farnsworth
Yeah.
narrate, and I mean that revelation of Rose is so powerful, and it's
Yeah.
a few seconds, and it's, on Sissy Spacek's side, it's not spoken, it's all in movement and facial expression.
Yeah.
But damn, like,
It's
crazy good
incredibly,
performance.
yeah, it's incredibly powerful. And it's a film where I described this as like a generous film, and that's what I think. Like it's just like Lynch is inviting us, and not just inviting us, but he's putting on full display these people who you almost just wouldn't think twice about, or you wouldn't think like, oh, I need to know that person's story, or I need to understand that person. And I think especially, the age of a lot of the characters in the film who are like, they're seniors, and I think at that point you're kind of thinking, well, there's lots of wisdom there, but at this point they're on their way out, and it's time for the next generation. And Lynch is saying, no, that's the wrong approach. Everyone here has a story to tell, and every one of them has value to bring. You just have to take the time to sit down and listen to them. They might not be moving as fast as you, but they have something to tell you that's going to be crucial to your life. And I think a lot of the stories we hear speak to that, and also speak to the idea of family in general. I'd forgotten a lot of the sequences in this film. I knew he had conversations with people, but I'd forgotten the specifics of it. And the first one he speaks with is this runaway girl who we find out is 5 months pregnant and is running away from home because she thinks her family hates her. And it's this incredible film that, for me, as like a fan of the works of Richard Linklater and just that kind of real-time conversation, it's a really beautiful scene in which we see this girl. The first time we see her is she's hitchhiking on the road. Alvin waves to her. She doesn't respond. She's just kind of like, angsty teenager. And then she kind of stumbles on his campsite later on that evening. And to see her kind of go from closed off and angry to opening up because of Alvin's wisdom, but really it's just Alvin's humanity, his willingness
and
to see her.
generosity, right?
Yes,
Like,
yeah.
what I was worried about while watching that scene was that it was going to turn into the sequence of an old man telling a young girl that, hey, it's not as bad as you think it is. Your family loves you for who you are. They'll accept you and this baby and blah, blah, blah. And what I love about that scene, what it surprised me with, was Alvin saying, he kind of does do that speech, but what's interesting about it is how he also says, now, look, I don't know really what you're going through. I don't know your family, but this is what I think. And I just appreciated him going like, look, I have no knowledge of your perspective. So
he
what
says
I'm saying could be wrong.
Yeah, he says it after, I think immediately after what you could call, it doesn't feel cliche when he says it, but he says a line that could come across as like, oh, of course that's what the person would say. But then he immediately undercuts it with that, like, I don't know. Like,
because he does say the old man thing. So it's honest to what an old man would say. I see a lot of my family in Alvin.
Right.
We're a Midwestern family. But then he has that line, and so like I like that touch of grace.
Yeah, I think it's the lack of judgment too. He's not there to judge her. He's not there to
judge her or her family.
Right. He's just there to he's seen some stuff. He knows stuff. He is paying for, in a very personal way, he understands what this girl is going through in the way of, maybe it's not the same experience, but as far as the regret of cutting yourself off from family, he knows that pain. and can speak with wisdom to that point and kind of remind her of things that maybe in her stress, in her frustration, in her anger, she's forgotten. It's the things he's trying to learn himself, and he's almost talking to a younger version of himself in a way, even though the circumstances are different.
Well, on his journey to his brother, he encounters several people who have these little divides in their family.
Yeah.
And when he encounters those moments, he tries to, you know, suggest a healing of those familial bonds rather than the continuation of anger.
But I think in the way that we're kind of discussing it, it's not in a, like, the film doesn't become like a sequence of like the old man helps this person back on track. It's like every person, that, not to minimize that, but the film is so rich in its supporting cast. The people he meets, you fall in love with them. Like the cyclist sequence where he's just on the side of the road and you're watching all these cyclists go by, and there's just this kind of, this whole movie has this kind of Wim Wenders vibe, his road movies, where it's a little bit more kind of like the road trip and just sort of admiring the little moments, the things that you kind of overlook in a fast-paced mainstream movie, like just kind of studying these. And you're thinking like, oh, this is just kind of a fun moment where he stops and all these bikers are passing him by and he's waving to them. But then the next scene is him arriving at their camp and they're excited to see him and they're applauding him and cheering him on. And then he has the conversation you describe, which is, you know, the thing about getting older, the terrible thing about getting older is remembering when you were young. But I just love this idea that all these people are living their own lives, but there's, everyone in this movie is generous in a way that I think even in Lynch's other films, he can sometimes be a little cynical. But I never understood I think there was a general like, oh, this is so off what happened to Lynch? Is he trying to make something more mainstream? Is he trying to make something more accessible because his movies became too obscure? But I don't feel that. This feels like David Lynch to me, even though what we're seeing is not kind of what we're used to seeing from David Lynch. Did you feel that as well?
I think that because I walked into the Straight Story thinking this was going to feel radically different than the other movies, what I ended up discovering was how similar it feels to all his other films.
Yeah.
And while the darkness in this film is more, well, the darkness in all his films are internal.
Yeah.
The darkness is less sinister, and like as I say this, I'm like, well, like all I see now are similarities, but like maybe less fantastical. Like there's a less fantastical element to the Straight Story than the types of evil that you see explored in other films. Or like I feel like I can't do it. I feel like I can't really say like this just doesn't feel like a David Lynch film. To me it feels very much like a David Lynch movie.
Oh, and I think it's also kind of demeaning. Like I was reading some interviews with David Lynch where these people are just fixating on like, this is so different. Did you try it? Like, were you trying to make a film that was different? And da-da-da. And he's trying to explain that he's like, no. All these films are coming from the same person. I just pick what speaks to me and what I love. And I try to just do that. I try to just make that. And this was the film I felt like I wanted to make at that point in time. And
really the only difference I can see in the darkness that is plaguing Alvin in the Straight Story versus the types of darkness that you see in his other films is that this movie is rated G.
yeah.
And so it doesn't, it doesn't go full Dennis Hopper on us at any given moment, right?
Certainly. But it also doesn't pull punches either. Like the scene in the bar where the two guys are talking about the World War II. Yeah, tell me what you thought of that. I mean,
that scene is punishing.
Yeah.
Like I felt it so profoundly. It's impossible for me not to like bring my grandfather into that scene, of a Navy veteran of World War II, of D-Day. He was on the USS Corey, which was the only destroyer that was sunk off the coast of Utah Beach on that day, survived it. Not a lot of his friends did. I am here because of that disaster. He ended up marrying his best friend's widow, and without D-Day, the version of Brad that is talking would not be talking. You know, it'd be a different jumble
Yeah.
of genetics. And so I think about my grandfather when he would reflect back on his war experiences when he got closer to the end of his life. You know, when I was a kid, we never
Mm.
really talked about it. But as I got into my 20s and 30s, he started to talk about it. And he would meet for with reunions. He had these Corey reunions every year, and they would all get together and they would tell war stories, sea stories, that kind of thing. And every now and again, you would have the privilege of wandering into these really dark moments of their hit in their history. And I felt like I was back at a Corey reunion
Yeah.
observing two old men relate something that has been torturing themselves for decades. And you get to see how, in sharing those two stories, it's not like they are unburdened, but there is the smallest kind of relief through their connection. And I was weeping during that
Yeah.
scene.
It's a heartbreaking scene, and it's and the way Lynch addresses the darkness that I think has fascinated him. It's acknowledging this kind of universal pain, and people's experiences are unique. We don't all experience pain in the same way, but in this particular moment, these two men have seen some really horrible things, and like you said, just by talking about it, they're able to just exercise these demons in a way, but they're able to kind of lean on each other. Like, they're not alone. They know that they're, because the pain is shared, that almost eases it a bit. Like you said, it doesn't take the burden away, but it does lift it a tiny bit. It makes it a kind of lighter weight to load. And I, I I don't even know where to begin about that scene, because it is so it feels so real. I don't know the history of these two men. I don't know what they went through. I know we're talking about I mean, this movie's based on a true story. I assume that these are things that Alvin Straight himself went through, but I just don't know the way these two actors play the scene and the way it's directed by Lynch, where it's just, you're so involved in this moment with really nothing. Like, it's just the two of them talking, and they are conjuring up these incredible emotions. uh it's an incredible scene. It's a beautiful scene. And Lynch, I love Lynch for doing this. He loves to, and we get it with like moments like the deer lady, who is just hysterical and very emotional, and some of
Dude,
his
but I
character.
so connected to her story
I know.
also.
Well, it's true, because I think that's another example of kind of the typical Lynch darkness, these hysterical characters. But this woman is so upset about hitting the deer. At the end, we realize it's because she loves the deer. She's
Well,
like, I love deer.
but also it's the torture of having to drive that stretch of road over and over and over again. She drives 40 miles this way in the morning,
Yep.
40 miles back, and that's why she keeps hitting these deer. And again, the way I relate to that is like Washington D.C. rush hour traffic. Every morning I get up, I go to work, I'm stuck in this traffic, and it's the same routine over and over again. And every time you get on that 495, you are putting your life on the line. You're getting
Yeah.
into accidents, and thankfully you survive it. But the reason you're doing it is because of goddamn capitalism. No wonder you're losing your damn mind, lady.
Right. But you compare, I think Lynch too often, if that hysterical deer woman scene represents the majority of Lynch's vibe in his films, I think we miss the power of what Lynch is capable of as a filmmaker in those quieter moments, like the bar scene, like the World War II discussion. And I don't think that's something that's like an anomaly. I think you have these incredible these performers are just, I don't even want to call it acting. It doesn't feel like acting, but I
Well,
think
there's like a like and again, this is not different than other Lynch films, but there will be characters you meet that just have a different wavelength of energy than other
yes, yeah,
characters, right? And so the deer woman, when she gets to the heights of her panic and freak out, you do recognize like things are pinging that connect that scene to other scenes in other David Lynch movies that you think are more Lynchian. But in those movies that you think are more Lynchian, you know, Blue Velvet, Mulholland Drive, there are also moments like the bar scene. Like he
Yeah.
does go high and low, you know, rapidly in all of his films.
Yeah, and I think people on a surface level, I think a vast misreading of David Lynch as a filmmaker is like, oh, he just makes weird stuff. He likes weird. It doesn't make any sense. His movies don't have any. You know, I couldn't disagree more.
Same,
I
yeah.
feel like Lynch knows. That's why his films are so effective and so powerful, and why he's so respected and beloved as a filmmaker, is because I think he has a deep, deep understanding of humanity.
And he is a poet, and he
Yeah.
is a guy who embraces metaphor. And maybe that's slightly different in the Straight Story, is that he's not embracing metaphor as strongly in this film or
Yeah.
as repeatedly in this film as he does in other movies. But I
Yeah.
bet you I could disagree with myself if I think about it a little more. You know, like,
there's stuff, you know, like the burning barn, like things
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
Like there are things that, you know, this is again only my second viewing.
that
There's
lightning bolt.
yes,
There's like
yes,
the best lightning crack I've
yes,
seen in a movie occurs in the Straight Story.
yeah. The one at the beginning,
Yeah.
yeah, when she gets the call
Yeah.
about Lyle, yeah, it's
So
so good. But things like, you know, the hat flying off, and that, like, you know, him having to stop for that, and the lawnmower breaking down right at the end of the journey, and then it just needs to be restarted. Like, that was all there was to it. You know, it took a minute. He just needed a minute to pause and reflect, and then the other lawnmower comes by, and he's like, well, hey, why don't you try it again? And he starts it up. Oh, yep, see you later.
Yeah.
Again, a moment that maybe somebody else would have been like, let's cut that, but Lynch, I don't imagine he had to fight too hard, but I imagine that's a moment Lynch would fight for it. And it's just
a pretty brisk movie. You know, it's 112 minutes. It is leisurely because Lynch likes to linger, but it is also super efficient.
Well, yeah, it's funny. It's funny. It's not just when you talk about like, oh, it's a man facing his mortality head on, and for the love of his brother, for a need to be forgiven. You know, it sounds very morose and doom and gloom, but it's not. It's a beautiful celebratory film about the power of the human spirit and the endurance of the physicality of humanity. Like, so this guy is,
well, and the power of forgiveness,
and the power of forgiveness as well. But it's it speaks to not just Alvin Straight, but Richard Farnsworth, because he almost passed on the film because he was suffering from, I think, prostate cancer, or like he was at the end of his life and he was in a lot of pain and struggling with a lot of health issues, and he didn't know if he could do the film. But the story of Alvin Straight so inspired him that despite the fact that he had cancer and was in constant pain, he felt he had to do this movie. It's heartbreaking to think about, but I don't know how soon afterwards it happened. I don't know exactly.
A year afterwards, like
a year
shortly
after the
a year after filming, shortly after the film's release, I believe.
He shot himself because he couldn't take the pain anymore. But to think this movie works on so many levels beyond just the story itself. It's like there were angels, like good spirits. Something was looking over this production, and that this was like his final statement. And you know, especially, you know, the end, we'll get to the end, but like now seeing that scene with Harry Dean Stanton, who's also passed, and when I first watched this, he was still alive. You know, it's just the meanings of this film and the depth of it, and the generosity. I keep using that word, but it's such a generous, life-affirming, beautiful movie that despite the sadness, despite the pain, there's so much joy in the movie. There's so much humor and love and just like good people doing good things to help each other. And it's very it's a very inspiring film.
It's
and
an affirming movie. It is an
Yeah.
affirming movie. I do think that knowing the agony that Richard Farnsworth was going through while he was making this movie does make it a complicated watch and a hard watch, and probably a more powerful watch as well.
Yeah.
And so like there's that like meta level to it that is like I said, complicated.
It's his last movie, and
Yeah.
he knew. I mean, it's very likely he knew, and you can easily read in his performance that he knows. And Lynch, I think, in a very unique way, Lynch has explored this with the reality of death hanging over the shoulders of, or like it's like a specter over this. And then Twin Peaks: The Return is very similar, where a lot of the actors passed away maybe a week after shooting their scenes. Lynch, like in the same way you described, he's not really mocking that overweight lady at the beginning of the film. He just admires her. Lynch respects death and he respects mortality, and he's not afraid of it, and he's willing to show it warts and all, to just look at it head on. And I think Farnsworth was willing to, he knew how important this film was to him and how important this film would be and how important the story of Alvin was. And with that knowledge, he basically said, I am going to do this, and I have to do this. And it adds a lot to the film, but it's not a film that dwells in tragedy or sadness. It just feels so, there's such a joy to it.
Well, I think it's interesting that Richard Farnsworth, who, whether he knew he was going to die soon or later, certainly knew that he had less life in front of him than he did behind him, that he chose to make a movie like this one with a message like this one. I think that's absolutely fascinating and says a lot about the movie and a lot about Richard Farnsworth.
We'll take, the pendulum is swinging so far into the sadness. Let's swing back the other way into the humor. One thing I wanted to point out, again, this is, David Lynch has always been hysterical. Even in his dark, disturbing movies, there are gut-busting, hilarious moments. One of the ones I'm thinking of is in Lost Highway, where I you'll have to tell me, I can't remember the actor's name, but the guy who's screaming at the person who was basically riding his tail in the car.
It's
like,
Robert, how dare Loggia.
Yes. Yeah. Like, don't you know motor vehicle accidents make up? Yeah, it's this hysterical stuff. And that like kind of mischievous streak of humor is in The Straight Story. Like the moment, after the deer lady is done hysterically screaming about the deer, Alvin checks the deer, and then the next shot is him cooking the deer with statues of deer looking over his shoulder, and he's very uncomfortable.
Yeah, and he turns his shoulder not to look at the statues.
Right. And the twin, is it the twins? They're brothers. Like
they're brothers, played by Chris Farley's brothers, Kevin Farley and John Farley.
I was going to say, one of them looked so much like him that I had a moment where I was like, no, it can't be, but you're saying it is?
Yeah.
They were related?
They're related. And so this is like another weird meta moment, right? Because apparently, I didn't do much research on this film afterwards, but when I saw that the Farley brothers were in there, I was like, well, not Farley brothers. When I saw
but maybe the Farley brothers are somewhere, we just don't know.
When I saw Kevin and John Farley, I thought, oh, that's interesting. 1999. Oh, so Chris Farley has gone. And so I looked up some little trivia on it, and apparently Chris Farley was going to be there with his brothers. All three of them were going to be in the film, but then Chris Farley died.
Wow.
And so now you're watching this scene where Alvin is telling these two bickering brothers, like, hey, like, you guys are brothers.
Yeah.
Right? Like, set aside this petty squabbling. You're going to regret it. And he's saying that to two brothers who have just lost their brother.
Yeah.
And like, I'm watching that scene.
Wow.
And again, I'm getting choked up.
Yeah.
And that's a lot.
That's what I'm saying. I know like David Lynch is a very spiritual person. He is really into transcendental meditation and stuff, but it's like between this movie and Twin Peaks: The Return, the stories behind the scenes that feed into the themes of the film are nuts. And it's just like David Lynch has tapped into something that is it's not it's mystical without being like, ooh, it's like spiritual is the only word I can think of. It feels spiritual.
For me, I've always found David Lynch films to be very human, and he celebrates both what humanity is great at and what they are awful at. And I think in this film, he explores both sides of the human condition, and ultimately comes out on a very positive side.
Yeah. And and again, it doesn't feel like it's not the
It's
like,
not
oh, David.
messagey.
Right. It's not messagey. It's not like, oh, David Lynch, like, where did this come from? Okay. Like, people were saying, oh, he's finally matured as a filmmaker. He's not going to make dark, twisted movies anymore, which is hysterical. But again, demeaning. And like, why would you say that? Like, it's very clear to me, looking at David Lynch again. I said this in the before section of this episode, but you watch interviews with him and you're like, how do you connect the dots between that man and something like Eraserhead or Mulholland Drive? And like some of the stuff he says, but like the way he talks, he's just got this James Stewart, gosh, geez, shucks, like this personality that is so adorable that like there's less of a leap for me to believe he made The Straight Story in some ways than there is for me to believe that's the guy who made Eraserhead.
I don't know. Again, like I came away going like, this is such a David Lynch movie.
Well, it is too. That's what's funny. And again, it's certainly like, the G-rated Disney movie of Lynch's filmography, but it's not like, oh, it's such a departure that you don't recognize him. I disagree, and it sounds like you're on the same page, where it's like, this is a David Lynch movie. I can feel it. You can see it in his filmography. You see the similarities in terms of shot composition, in terms of things that he was doing as a filmmaker around that time that he would take to the next level in subsequent projects. Like, I agree completely. It is 100%. It comes from the same man who did make Eraserhead. And that's what I think makes it so much better. It's like, we don't have to see it as a quote unquote departure, even though that's obviously what it is, but it's made by David Lynch. It's the same guy.
Now, I haven't fact checked this, but this was a little bit of trivia that I found on the internets, and it said that this was the first David Lynch film that Roger Ebert gave a positive review to.
That's correct.
Which I love. I love that
correct.
note. And I do remember watching Roger Ebert, Siskel and Ebert's review of Blue Velvet, and I have it in my mind, burned into my brain, the anger that Roger Ebert brought to Blue Velvet, which I find quite delightful, frankly. And I just love that we finally get to The Straight Story, and I'm going to have to read his review or watch his segment on At the Movies, where he talks about The Straight Story. And
he eats some humble pie, I would say. So I haven't read the review either, but I did see that. And it's funny. It's like it took Ebert that long to understand Lynch. And again, it's not... Lynch is making a gentle, generous film that is dealing with similar themes, but not with the same embrace of the darkness and the surreal imagery
and the exploitation, right? Like, that was like Ebert's big problem with Blue Velvet was the Isabella Rossellini scene.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think maybe it just finally clicked with Ebert, because he also gave Mulholland Drive a 4-star review. So I think maybe this is the turning point for him, where maybe people saw David Lynch as like, oh, it's a gimmick, like the exploitation is a gimmick, and finally understood that no, David Lynch meant it. Like, it's coming from a place of sincerity.
Well,
it's not
and
a
I
put
mean,
on.
like, it could also just be a straight taste thing. Again, I haven't fact checked this with Roger Ebert. I haven't gone back and read any of his reviews or follow-ups to those reviews. I would love to read his original Blue Velvet and see if he has done a revisitation in one of his like great movies books or whatnot. I feel like that's
I don't know
happened.
if he ever did. I if you find it, let me know.
All right, I will.
And
I'm
let the
gonna
internet
go
know.
hunting for it. But like, I also think like those movies, Blue Velvet, Mulholland Drive, there's a hill there that some audience members are just not going to climb from a taste perspective, and that's cool. Like, my mom's never going to love Inland Empire or whatever.
Right.
And that's fine. You don't need to love every David Lynch movie equally.
Well, I think also like the Straight Story 2 is even though it's a G-rated Disney movie, it's not like a mainstream film. Like
No.
this is still a film I can see people being turned off by the pace,
Yeah.
maybe just not invested
It
in the
certainly
story.
doesn't feel like a Disney film.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. That's what I'm saying. It never feels conventional in the way that you might think with that brand attached and that rating attached. It would. And it's kind of shocking that Disney even purchased it in the first place. But it is a film I can see people kind of being turned off by things like that, like maybe the pacing. But those are people I just don't understand. It's like one of those moments where you have to look at somebody and say, I understand what you're saying to me, but if you don't like the Straight Story, I can understand not loving it maybe, but this is a film that's so hard to outright dislike that I would seriously question somebody's...
like I said at the beginning, when I went to rate it originally, I was like, 3.5 stars, because like my love for it was at like the 3.5 stars range,
Yeah.
even though when I thought about it just from like an appreciation point of view, I was like, it's probably 4 stars. I should probably give it 4 stars.
Right. And you could even give it 5 stars by the time we're done here.
It's possible.
Who knows?
It's possible.
We'll see. That's the thing. You thought we spoiled the episode for you, ladies and gentlemen, but just wait till we get to the end. That's the true surprise. But yeah, that's one of my favorite things is that Roger Ebert finally sided with David Lynch on this one. We've talked about a few meta moments. I know you said there's like have we already discussed the big
Farley
meta moment?
brothers. The Farley brothers is
okay.
like a meta moment that just floored me.
I just didn't know about that at all, and that's fantastic. Are there any other things we need to address in the film? We've talked about, I mean, the soundtrack. I love the soundtrack to this movie so much. I mean, Angelo Badalamenti has done such amazing work in general, and just like Lynch, where it's like, oh, he kind of does the moody, unsettling. It's like, oh no, again, this feels like a Badalamenti score. It's just a different flavor than we are used to.
Yeah, I'm just going, like, I'm seeing, like, well, how is it received? Academy Awards wise, it received an actor nom for Richard Farnsworth, but that was it. It looks like
that's it.
It was nominated for the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival. Didn't win though.
Well, let's talk about this real quick.
Yeah.
This is the Straight Story's reputation in general. It was a well-received film that didn't do great at the box office, but even to this day, I feel like people aren't talking about this film as much as they should be. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I agree 100%.
You hadn't seen it, but beyond that, like, do you think we're now at the point where it's like, look, I literally, no joke, before we did this episode, there is a suggestions email that Criterion Collection has where it's like, hey, do you have a suggestion for a movie?
This should be a Criterion.
Send it over. I just wrote them an email. This is the only time I've ever written to Criterion, as far as I'm aware, asking them to put a movie in the collection. But I just did for the Straight Story. I'm like, look, this movie deserves that attention and the revival as a David Lynch film, as a crucial point in his filmography.
And they've got a bunch of Lynch Criterions now.
Right. This is just, you got to it's another notch in the belt. You got to get it on there. But do you think we're at the point where this movie is due for a revival? Should more people be talking about this movie?
Well, I mean, my answer is yes, of course, because I've just discovered this film and I really love it. But I wonder, where are we with David Lynch right now? Like when Twin Peaks The Return came out, there was like this groundswell of love for the director again. And I think there are certain communities within film Twitter where David Lynch is on, for lack of a better metaphor, the Mount Rushmore of film directors, right? And he's certainly one of my favorites.
Yeah, mine too.
And I think what's interesting is the fact that I never watched it. And the reason I never watched it is because the plot is old man drives a lawnmower from A to B to see his brother. And
it's Yes Country for Old Men.
Yes, it's like, that's how we should sell it, is Yes Country for Old Men. We need to write that think piece article for Vulture.
I think so. I mean, there's got to be. It was what, 1999.
Yeah.
Is there any anniversary coming up? I think next year is the
Yeah.
anniversary.
So like
So
I think this is maybe one think piece, one Criterion release away from recognition. But I do wonder, like, just to get back to my David Lynch point, like I feel like since Twin Peaks The Return and we had that groundswell, I feel like we've stopped talking about Lynch in the last couple of years.
yeah, I
And
haven't. I talk about him
thankfully,
literally every day.
he does show up in The Fabelmans and gives a
Yes.
knockdown, bang out, brilliant performance as John Ford in The
Man.
Fabelmans. So it'd be nice for that little role. Like I was kind of hoping that he would get a nomination for that tiny scene. Like if Judd Hirsch could get a nomination, David Lynch should get a nomination.
Right.
But
Absolutely.
sadly, didn't happen.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I think I'm speaking more on behalf of the Straight Story maybe than like David Lynch, because I agree with you.
But that's my point, right? Like, so
yeah,
like you know, I feel like David Lynch has dwindled a little bit, and if David Lynch has dwindled a little bit within the conversation, then the Straight Story is way down there.
maybe because it's like, you know, it's cool to say you love Mulholland Drive. The Straight Story isn't
not a cool movie.
So that I can see the angle. Again, it's like what we were talking about before. It's like, how do you market this? You can't really market it to your typical David Lynch fan, because I think there's a portion of them who really get off on the like the darkness and the twisted visuals and things like that, where it's like they would look at the Straight Story and be like, lame.
Well, when you
like,
watch
you know, like,
Eraserhead or Mulholland Drive, like it's obvious how wild they are and how like unique they are. And I think you need to maybe, you know, calm down a little bit to recognize how unique the Straight Story is and how radical the Straight Story is. Because I feel like this is as radical as anything in his filmography.
Lynch himself has said he thinks this is his most experimental film.
I could totally see Lynch saying that.
I mean, it is for him for sure, but also it's like, you know, it is what its title describes. Like it's a very linear film. It takes a lot of the scenes are just dialogue driven. It is slow. It's about a guy who is riding a tractor at 5 miles an hour.
It is a little deceptive, like that title, The Straight Story, and it's about a guy going from A to B on a lawnmower. Like that's not quite true.
Yeah,
and you need to watch it to see how it's not.
Agreed. Okay, so Criterion, get on that. Read your emails. Let's get this in the Criterion collection, please. It's only a matter of time, but I will take full credit. I will say this episode, we'll take joint credit. I'll split the credit with Brad 50-50. But we'll say this episode combined with my sternly worded email is what's going to push it over to the edge, so that when the announcement comes, the inevitable announcement comes, we can take credit for it.
I will take credit for it.
Anything else that we need to say about the Straight Story, Brad?
It's good. Don't be like past Brad and not watch it. Be like now Brad and watch it.
Exactly. And I couldn't agree more. I endorse that wholeheartedly. So final ratings, again, we're going to go off the beaten path here, just like the Straight Story. We always do a final rating system that's some sort of like reference to the film, but this time around Alvin talks about how he just wants to see Lyle again and how he wants to look up at the stars with him. So I think it's only fitting that our final rating should be stars. So Brad, how many stars will you give the Straight Story?
Shawn, I'm going to tell you how many stars in a second, but I realized we didn't really talk that much about that final scene and the last shot of this movie.
Oh my God. You're right. And I give this episode of Missing Frames 1 star for missing this. Let's get this in here.
The final, when Harry Dean Stanton finally exits his cabin and he calls out for his brother first, because Alvin calls for Lyle, then Lyle responds, Alvin. He comes out. Of course, Lyle has a walker. He can do what his brother cannot, get a walker. And then they sit on the porch together. And you've already referenced that moment. But when Lyle sees that, like, you came from Iowa to here on that. Yeah. And then that tear that comes down Harry Dean Stanton, because like Harry Dean Stanton doesn't get a speech. You know, he doesn't have like this movie moment, you know? Yeah. But he gets
it's the moment where Yeah, the audience, that your standard audience is like, oh, that guy. I know I've seen him in something. But
The
like,
Avengers.
yeah, he's son, you have a condition. It speaks to Harry Dean Stanton's incredible abilities as a performer, that in that one moment he lives up to the legend of Lyle. Like, that moment that we are building to this entire film pays off, and when I say he doesn't have to do much, he does. He's brilliant. He's just Harry Dean Stanton,
I
and he's
wish I
brilliant in
didn't
that
know
moment.
that Harry Dean Stanton was in this movie, because if I'd been like sitting in the theater and Harry Dean Stanton came out, I would have been like, of course.
Yes,
Of
it would have
course
been.
Lyle is Harry Dean
It
Stanton.
would have been a 5-star movie, 5 Lyle movie.
Yeah, and so
but
then, they just connect and the camera, rises.
right,
the frame
it's
rises.
just the end. He's like, you rode that all the way here, and he says, I did, Lyle, and that's the last line in the movie.
And then it pushes up to those stars that we're
Yep.
about to use to rank this movie.
That's
And,
exactly it.
the first shot of the movie are the stars, and the last shot of the movie are the stars, and it's
a lot of
really
stars.
beautiful. It's
a lot of stars.
It's also perfect. Like, there is no better ending that could have been made for this movie than what Lynch found here.
One of the best endings, I think, of one of my personal favorite endings, at least, of any film that I've seen.
How many stars am I going to pluck out of that cosmos to rate this movie? I'm going to go with 4 stars, because I still can't do 5 stars on a first watch. And
Damn it,
like, the
Brad.
only thing that's kind of niggling me a little bit is how Lynch sees that one lady in the beginning. Like, I cannot get into Lynch's
His loving
headspace
gaze. Okay,
to really
all right.
understand if he is mocking her or not.
He's not, Brad.
I don't know that. Do I know David Lynch? I do
he's
not. David Lynch will mock humans. Like, if you watch his movies, he will mock people, right? And you either go with him on it or not. And I'm just not sure if I'm there with him and the woman with the donuts or their
Gotcha.
snowballs.
All right.
So 4 stars. I loved it, Shawn.
As someone who gave it 4 stars the first time you saw it, I'm elevating to the 5th star. This is a masterpiece. I love it so much, and I hope more people watch it, so that more people are just talking about it, so I can have an excuse to talk about it even more. But yeah, I love it. I love it, Brad. Thank you so much for gifting me with the opportunity to share this with you on this 130th episode of Missing Frames.
Yeah, and we started on the 30th. Like, our first collaboration was episode 30 with Dirty Harry. We went from Dirty Harry to The Straight Story.
This is perfect, and I'm excited to see where we go next with 140. It's going to be up to you.
That's a lot of pressure. I feel like we had an answer. I feel like we had even said, like, oh, that should be my next pick, and I can't remember now.
I can't remember either. Well, somebody will have to go back and tell us on Twitter or wherever. But you've done well for yourself. Like, it's always like the pressure. There always feels like there's going to be pressure, but you end up picking great movies. And so far, I feel like there hasn't been a dud from either of us.
I agree.
We've done a good job.
Were you worried at all that I wasn't going to love The Straight Story?
I was not that worried. It's just like I said, it's a movie that's impossible not to enjoy on some level. It's a hard movie to dislike. So I had a feeling. I didn't know to what extent you might like it, but I knew you were going to enjoy it. And as a David Lynch fan, I had a feeling that enjoyment would be glowing. So I'm very, very happy to hear that was the case.
All right, cool.
And that you thought it was a 5-star film.
It might be.
Tell the people, once the Twitter conversation, the inevitable film Twitter goes gaga for The Straight Story when Criterion releases it on Blu-ray, and they want to talk to the man who started it all, Mouthdork. That's where they can find you, right? At Mouthdork?
Yes, out at Mouthdork on all social medias. You can also listen to my podcast that I do with my wife, Lisa, Comic Book Couples Counseling, where we take a self-help book and a comic book couple and we collide them together. And in that conversation, we better understand our own relationship We are about to start a couples session series on Mark and Eve from the comic book Invincible. And we are kicking things off by actually having Robert Kirkman, the creator of that comic, the creator of The Walking Dead, on the show. And
Yes.
Robert Kirkman's the one who programs our 4-episode series. We're like, Robert, we don't know what comics to cover in Invincible. What should we do? And that's the first question we have with Robert Kirkman, and then he answers it.
Oh.
And we do what Robert Kirkman says.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. That is fantastic. I'm very excited. Everyone, make sure you are subscribed to the Comic Book Couples Counseling Podcast. You can subscribe to Missing Frames too if you want. We don't quite have the caliber of Robert Kirkman, but
Not yet.
I talked with Richard Donner, so that
Dude.
I am gonna wave that flag for many, many years.
Yeah. I will be endlessly jealous for that conversation. What a damn gem. And I hope to see that movie on the big screen again someday. Fingers crossed.
You and me both. And I am at Yay Shondorman on Twitter. I'm Shondorman05 on Letterboxd. You can see the evolution of the Straight Stories rating if you follow me there. I want to thank my guest Brad one more time. Thank you, Brad.
Yeah.
And you'll be back. People know where to find you. They know you'll be back. They know there's more franchise boys out there waiting. It will happen, and I am excited and delighted and looking forward to it.
I'm crazy excited about the next Franchise Boys. I've already started on that journey, and it's going to be a good one.
It's going to be good. Thank you, everybody, for listening. We will see you at the movies.